Unless you have lived it, you cannot imagine what it feels like to be by yourself, between four cold walls, with little concept of time, no one to confide in, and only a pillow for comfort, for years on end. Those are the words of Gabriel Reyes. According to court records, he spent over a decade in what former inmates call a living tomb. By the early 2010s, over 500 people had been held in solitary confinement at California's Pelican Bay State Prison for more than 10 years. 78 had been there for over 2 decades. 6 had been isolated for more than 30 years. This is the story of what that isolation does to the human mind, and how the people's society tried to fought back. What most people don't know is how they did it. 4 alleged gang leaders. Rival factions. Years of engineered hatred between them. In a moment, you'll understand why what happened next changed prison policy across America. But first, you need to understand what the SHU really is. Pelican Bay State Prison opened in December 1989 in Crescent City, California. According to Mike Wallace's 1993 60 Minutes investigation, the state of California proudly called it the wave of the future. The Security Housing Unit, the SHU, contained 1,056 solitary confinement cells. Court documents describe them as 8 feet by 10 feet. A concrete ledge with a foam pad for a bed. A steel combination sink and toilet. 2 concrete cubes serving as desk and chair. Former inmate Arthur Ramirez wrote, "The SHU is the new Alcatraz where supposedly the worst of the worst are placed. But here's what makes Pelican Bay different. According to investigative reports, the cells are organized into 8 cell pods. Armed guards monitor from central control booths through perforated steel doors. Easy for guards to see in. Nearly impossible for prisoners to see out." Former inmates describe spending 22.5 to 23 hours per day in these cells. The remaining 90 minutes? Alone in a concrete exercise cage. No windows. No sunlight. No phone calls. No contact visits. By 2011, according to data from the Center for Constitutional Rights, 46% of the Pelican Bay SHU population had been in solitary for over 10 years. But the real danger begins when you understand who gets sent there. And why. Court testimony from the Ashker versus Brown lawsuit reveals 3 ways California's prison system controlled who lived in the SHU. Rule 1. Gang validation. According to legal filings, you could be validated as a gang member based on circumstantial evidence. Reading materials about Black history. Creating cultural artwork. Writing in Swahili. Having your name found in another prisoner's possession. Former inmate Todd Ashker described the system in court documents. The only way out was to parole, snitch, or die. Debriefing, providing information that incriminates others, became the primary escape route. But as multiple former inmates testified, desperate men make accusations. True or not? Rule 2. Administrative discretion. Corrections officials had tremendous power. According to the 1995 federal court case Madrid versus Gomez, there was minimal procedural protection. Limited oversight. Prison records show that custody officers could determine what constituted a rule violation. And violations in the SHU could extend your time there. The invisible enemy. Here's what most people outside don't understand. According to multiple former inmates' testimony, validation could be based on confidential information. Information you never saw. Sources you couldn't challenge. As documented in hunger strike demands, prisoners called this system arbitrary, inhumane, torture. But the system didn't just control bodies. Court-appointed psychologist Dr. Craig Haney studied what it did to minds. In the early 1990s, Dr. Craig Haney, a social psychologist at UC Santa Cruz, was granted rare access to Pelican Bay's SHU. What he found became the foundation of multiple federal lawsuits. According to his published research in 2003, Haney interviewed 100 randomly selected SHU prisoners. His findings, presented in federal court. 91% suffered from anxiety and nervousness. More than 80% reported headaches, lethargy, trouble sleeping. 70% felt themselves on the verge of emotional breakdown. But those were just the common symptoms. Nearly all reported what Heaney called isolation-related pathology. Ruminating thoughts. Intrusive thoughts that wouldn't stop. Hypersensitivity to sound. The drip of water. The hum of ventilation. Difficulties with concentration and memory. Irrational anger. An overwhelming urge to withdraw socially, even when given the rare chance for human contact. Here's what the studies found that changed everything. Dr. Stuart Gracian, a Harvard-trained psychiatrist, identified what he termed a specific syndrome caused by solitary confinement. His research, submitted in multiple court cases, documented hallucinations, acute panic attacks, overt paranoia, diminished impulse control. According to research published in the American Journal of Psychiatry, roughly 1/3 of solitary inmates Gracian examined were actively psychotic or acutely suicidal. Former Judge Thelton Henderson, in the 1995 Madrid v. Gomez ruling, wrote that placing mentally ill inmates in the SHU was the mental equivalent of putting an asthmatic in a place with little air to breathe. According to prison policy research, SHU units comprise only 10% of California's prison cells. More than 70% of California's prison suicides took place in these units. The system was designed to break people. And for many it worked. But in 2011, something unprecedented happened inside the SHU. The people California tried to silence found their voices. According to interviews conducted by journalist Benjamin Wallace Wells for New York Magazine, in 2006 prison officials reorganized the SHU. They placed alleged leaders of rival prison gangs together in what was called the short corridor. It cells. For leaders. Different races. Different gangs. Different backgrounds. The prison system thought isolation would break their power. Former inmates who were there described what happened next. They didn't talk about gang politics at first. They talked about their families. One of those men was Todd Ashker. According to his testimony in the Ashker v. Brown lawsuit, he was sent to prison as a teenager in the late 1980s. By 2009, he had spent nearly 20 years in solitary confinement at Pelican Bay. Court records show Ashker was originally convicted of burglary under California's three strikes law. He received a sentence of 25 years to life. He was then validated as a gang member and placed in the SHU indefinitely. In sworn testimony, Ashker described his reality. Unless you have lived it, you cannot imagine what it feels like to be by yourself, between four cold walls, with little concept of time, no one to confide in, and only a pillow for comfort, for years on end. It is a living tomb. Another man in that pod was Danny Murillo. According to CBS News interviews conducted by Oprah Winfrey in 2017, Murillo went to prison as a teenager. He was sent to the Pelican Bay SHU for an offense committed inside prison. In his own words during the interview, "It was created to break me, mentally, physically, and spiritually." Multiple former inmates described the same pattern. Young men. Mistakes made behind bars. Decades in isolation. Arthur Ramirez's story, documented by the Center for Constitutional Rights, shows how the system worked. According to his published account, Ramirez was placed in solitary confinement for a total of 33.5 years. 24 of those years were at Pelican Bay. His first disciplinary citation? He donated artwork to a non-profit organization. His second? He participated in a hunger strike. In testimony, Ramirez described the mental toll. "When I'm asked how I managed so many years I said, same way you eat an elephant, one bite at a time." But he also described something darker. According to his account, at least 2,000 men broke during their time in the SHU. They debriefed. They implicated others, whether truthfully or not, just to escape. Former prisoner Brutha Bar Edie Williamson's account, published by the Prisoner Human Rights Movement, reveals what decades of isolation steals from a person. According to his testimony, Williamson arrived at Pelican Bay's SHU on November 29, 1990. He was released from the SHU on January 23, 2015. In his published account, Williamson described his first sunrise after leaving the SHU. Watching through a bus window as the sky transformed into a mixture of blended orange-red-violet-blue colors. He described his first contact visit with his sister after decades. How he squeezed her hand so tight it went numb. "I guess I subconsciously was that little child back home walking everywhere holding securely to my older sister's hand." He described receiving his first regular-sized toothbrush after 25 years of using miniature toothbrushes, the kind made for pet animals. According to his testimony, "Each time I use it, the feel of being human is always at the front of my mind." These men, Ashker, Murillo, Ramirez, Williamson, and others, were held in conditions that federal judges, psychologists, and human rights organizations called torture. But what California didn't anticipate was what would happen when these men, isolated for decades, found a way to communicate. The answer changed everything. According to federal court records, Todd Ashker and another inmate, Danny Troxel, filed a pro-SE complaint in 2009. They challenged California's security threat group regulations that allowed indefinite isolation based on alleged gang ties. The system ignored them. But inside the short corridor, something was building. According to NPR reporting and interviews with former inmates, the men in the short corridor developed what they called a revolutionary book club. They would shout discussions through their pod about books on political consciousness, civil rights, prison reform. Todd Ashker and the other men came to a realization, as documented in multiple interviews. The racial divisions between them were artificial. They were members of a prisoner class. And if they wanted change, they needed to act together. On July 1, 2011, according to court records and news reports, inmates across Pelican Bay's SHU began refusing food. They had 5 core demands, documented in prison records and advocacy group communications. Eliminate group punishments for individual rule violations. Abolish the debriefing policy. End long-term solitary confinement. Provide adequate food. Expand programs and privileges for SHU inmates. Within 3 weeks, according to prison data, the strike grew to 6,600 participants across California's prison system. The strike was led from inside solitary confinement. Men who couldn't see each other, couldn't speak directly, couldn't meet face to face. According to testimony from strike organizers, they used every method available. Messages passed through visiting family members. Notes hidden in legal mail. Communications shouted between cells during the brief moments guards allowed. Most revolutionary of all, according to multiple reports, rival gang leaders signed an agreement to end hostilities between racial and ethnic factions in California prisons. Former inmate Jack Morris, who spent over 30 years in solitary, described it in later interviews. "There is a historical event taking place here at Pelican Bay right now. The End Hostility Pact changed the atmosphere of the institution." After 3 weeks, according to strike documents, California's Department of Corrections announced a comprehensive review of every prisoner in the SHUs. The prisoners called off the strike. But according to follow-up investigations, by 2013, of the 4,527 inmates in California's SHUs, only 382 had been reviewed. Roughly half returned to general population. The system had barely changed. On July 8, 2013, according to court records and media reports, over 30,000 prisoners across California's 33 state prisons refused their meals. This wasn't just Pelican Bay anymore. Testimony from strike organizers reveals they had successfully coordinated action across the entire California prison system. Some strikes extended to 4 private out-of-state facilities. According to inmate testimony documented by Amnesty International, prison officials adopted policies to discourage strikers. Refusal of medications. Failure to monitor health status. On July 22, 2013, court records and news reports confirmed that Billy Garrow, Cell, a SHU inmate at Corcoran State Prison, died. He was the first and only striker to die during the campaign. Fellow prisoners reported Garrow had requested medical attention days before his death. The strike continued. 60 days. 2 months. According to news coverage and official statements, the strike brought national attention. Media outlets across the country covered it. Human rights organizations condemned California's use of solitary confinement. Outside the prisons, family members organized. Dolores Canales, whose son Johnny participated in all 3 hunger strikes, co-founded California Families Against Solitary Confinement. In interviews, Canales described the prison system's response. They attempted to dehumanize and criminalize their efforts, and then them as human beings. But the public pressure was mounting. On September 5, 2013, according to strike documents and official statements, California State Senator Lonnie Hancock and Assemblymember Tom Amiano made a promise. They pledged to hold public hearings, to draft legislation, to address the strikers' demands. The remaining 100 or so strikers voted to end the protest. But the real victory came from somewhere else. In May 2012, while the hunger strikes were ongoing, the Center for Constitutional Rights joined Todd Ashker's legal fight. They filed an amended complaint in Ashker v. Brown. 10 plaintiffs, all from Pelican Bay's SHU, all held in solitary for over a decade. The lawsuit charged that California's practice violated the 8th Amendment's prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment. It violated due process. According to court records, the case was certified as a class action. On September 1, 2015, California reached a settlement. According to the agreement terms, California agreed to end indeterminate solitary confinement throughout the state prison system. Here's what that meant. Inmates could no longer be isolated indefinitely as a preventive measure. Only those who committed new crimes while incarcerated were eligible for solitary, and only for up to 5 years maximum. According to data released by the Center for Constitutional Rights 1 year after the settlement. In 2011, more than 500 prisoners had been in solitary at Pelican Bay for over 10 years. By October 2016, only 5 remained, and they were scheduled for release. That's a 99% reduction. Throughout California, 1,557 prisoners were reviewed. 1,532 designated for transfer out of solitary. At least 1,512 actually transferred. California's indefinite solitary population dropped 97%. But here's what most people still don't know. According to CBS News reporting from 2017, Todd Ashker was released from the SHU under the settlement terms. He was transferred to Salinas Valley State Prison. In April following his transfer, Ashker walked to the prison dining hall. He sat at a table with other men, according to his later testimony. So, this is what it feels like to be around fellow human beings and share a meal. A mundane moment. For anyone else. For Ashker, it was the first time in over 20 years. According to his published account, when Arthur Ramirez was released to general population on November 8, 2013, it was like a time machine. After 33.5 years in solitary, he saw the sun. He described it as literally re-energizing my whole body. His wrinkles disappeared. He looked 10 years younger. He saw paintings on prison buildings, garbage trucks, other inmates walking freely, a bus, things the rest of us don't think twice about. But according to a 2017 Stanford University report on mental health consequences, the damage doesn't simply vanish. Former SHU inmates who had been out of solitary for an average of 14 months still reported emotional suppression and dysregulation, significant alterations in cognition and perception, problems with attention and memory, pervasive hypervigilance and worry, chronic feelings of being under threat. The majority said they needed mental health care as a result of psychological harm from the SHU. But according to the report, they were hesitant to request services in prison. They didn't trust the system. In the 2017 CBS News interview, Danny Murillo, who spent decades in the Pelican Bay SHU, shared something crucial. According to his testimony, it was created to break me mentally, physically, and spiritually. The documentary's most haunting insight comes from Dr. Craig Haney's ongoing research. According to studies published after the settlement, many former SHU inmates appear to function normally. They smile. They interact. But in private interviews, they confide. You know, I may look like I'm doing okay, but I'm really not. Here's the moment that changes everything. In the same 2017 CBS News report, Scott Kernan, then California's Corrections Secretary, was asked directly by Oprah Winfrey. Do you believe solitary confinement drives men mad? According to the interview transcript, Kernan agreed. Yes, it does. He called the policy a mistake in retrospect. A mistake. That's what California called 30 years of systematic isolation. Thousands of people. Some for decades. Hundreds who attempted suicide. Hundreds more who succeeded. A mistake. But the story doesn't end there. Because what happened at Pelican Bay spread beyond California. According to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, on any given day between 2017 to 2018, an estimated 55,000 to 62,500 people were held in solitary confinement in state and federal prisons. The Pelican Bay settlement changed California. But according to Solitary Watch, a prison reform advocacy organization, most other states continue the practice. However, California's example sparked a reform movement. According to Truth Out reporting from 2023, California advocates have repeatedly introduced legislation called the Mandela Act, named after Nelson Mandela, who spent 18 years in solitary confinement. The bill would restrict solitary confinement to 15 consecutive days maximum. That's the United Nations standard. According to legislative records, a similar bill passed both California legislative houses in 2022. The governor vetoed it. The bill was reintroduced in 2023. It's still being fought for. According to multiple news reports, Colorado has led the nation in reform. The state eliminated solitary confinement for juveniles and the mentally ill. Director Rick Ramish, according to reporting, has endorsed the Mandela rules and significantly reduced Colorado's use of isolation. But according to prison researchers, the vast majority of America's prisons still use long-term solitary confinement. Todd Ashker, Arturo Castellanos, George Franco, Sidiwa Nantambu Jama. According to records from the American Friends Service Committee, these were the 4 prison reps who planned the first hunger strikes from inside Pelican Bay's short corridor. In a 2020 joint statement published by the AFSC, they wrote, "Without prisoners speaking about our conditions of confinement, the public narrative about imprisonment and mass incarceration is missing a critical voice. Our voice, the incarcerated. We are the first-hand experts on the daily experience of being caged in prison generally and the trauma of extreme isolation." Their leadership showed something that challenges everything we think we know about punishment and reform. Men that California called too dangerous to be around run-of-the-mill murderers and rapists. Men validated as gang leaders. Isolated for decades. They organized the largest hunger strike in California prison history. They did it across racial lines that had divided California prisons for generations. They did it from solitary confinement. And they won. Here's what the Pelican Bay story forces us to confront. If extreme isolation was supposed to make prisons safer, why did violence persist? If it was supposed to break gang power, why did it take organized, non-violent protest to end it? If it was supposed to reform behavior, why does research show it destroys mental health? According to Dr. Craig Haney's testimony in federal court and published research, solitary confinement is the opposite of rehabilitation. In interviews with Solitary Watch, Haney explained, "If we really wanted to rehabilitate people, what we would do is to foster agency, so that when they get out of prison, they can create their own life in a healthy way. Instead, solitary confinement strips away agency. It creates dependency. It damages the human capacity for social interaction. And according to Bureau of Justice Statistics, over 90% of people in California's prisons, including those in the SHU, eventually complete their sentences. They return to our communities. After years, sometimes decades, of psychological damage. Here's the piece of this story that changes everything. Most people assume solitary confinement is reserved for the most violent acts. People who pose an immediate danger. But according to court testimony and inmate accounts, that's not how it actually works. Todd Ashker's case, validated based on alleged gang association. Original crime, burglary. Arthur Ramirez, 33 years in solitary. First disciplinary citation, donating artwork to a nonprofit. Bar Edie Williamson, 25 years in the SHU. According to his testimony, never told what specific evidence validated him. The system wasn't based on what you did. It was based on who they thought you were. And according to multiple court findings, once you were in, there was no clear way out, except to inform on others, serve your entire sentence, or die. The 2015 Ashker v. Brown settlement contained a critical admission buried in legal language. According to the agreement terms, California acknowledged that housing inmates in the SHU based solely on gang validation, without a recent serious rules violation, violated their constitutional rights. Translation: for decades, California had been punishing people not for crimes, but for associations, real or alleged, without trial, without evidence they could see or challenge, for years, sometimes for life. And the state knew. Federal Judge Thelton Henderson had ruled parts of the SHU system unconstitutional back in 1995 in Madrid v. Gomez. 20 years passed before California changed. In published accounts, former SHU inmates describe what stays with them. Gabriel Reyes, according to his testimony, wrote, "I often wonder if I will ever mentally recover from the extreme trauma I have endured." Johnny Vick, who spent over 20 years in the Pelican Bay SHU, told researchers, "The worst part was the uncertainty. Not knowing if you'd ever get out. Not knowing if anyone outside even knew you existed." Multiple former inmates reported the same recurring nightmare. Waking up convinced they were still in the SHU. The walls closing in. The silence suffocating. Years after release, the cage remained in their minds. When confronted with these stories, when confronted with the research, prison officials often gave the same response. According to testimony from corrections officials in multiple hearings, these are the worst of the worst. They're too dangerous for general population. But here's what that argument ignores. According to research by the Vera Institute of Justice, there's no evidence that solitary confinement makes prisons safer. States that have dramatically reduced solitary confinement, like Colorado, have seen decreases in violence, not increases. Mississippi closed its notorious Unit 32 Supermax in 2010. According to state data, overall prison violence dropped by 50% in the following years. The worst of the worst narrative? According to the data, it's a myth that justified torture. There's another cost most people never consider. According to data from the Vera Institute of Justice, housing an inmate in solitary confinement costs approximately $75,000 per year, nearly 3 times the cost of general population housing. In California alone, with over 500 people held in indefinite solitary before the settlement, that's over $37 million per year. For decades. To damage people psychologically. To violate their constitutional rights. To make prisons more dangerous, not less. But the biggest cost comes when these individuals are released. According to research published in the International Journal of Law and Psychiatry, individuals released directly from solitary confinement to the community have significantly higher recidivism rates. Dr. Craig Haney's research documented why. After years of extreme isolation, former SHU inmates struggle with basic social interactions, sensory overload in public spaces, anxiety in crowds, trust and relationships, employment stability. According to his testimony, we take people who have been incarcerated in these places where they lose their capacity for social interaction, for genuine connection with other people, and we release them directly to the streets.